Daniel. Let's go to Daniel, the 6th. Let's see. Let's go to Daniel 6. Let me see. I know, Daniel, you better not be too far away, because you know. Now, y'all know I always talk throughout this whole thing, because you know. And I say that because I have to, and it says Daniel, what chapter? The 6th. I'm in Daniel 5. So let me get to the 6th chapter. Well, I'm glad it wasn't that far, because y'all know if I've been having to search this whole Bible, I thank my brother-in-law for giving me the ones that got these where you could actually see where it's close to. So here it is, Daniel, the 6th chapter, the 1st verse. Okay, it says, "It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom and 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom." So let's go to Daniel. We're still in the 6th chapter. Let's go down to the 25th verse in Daniel. And see, this was still in Daniel talking about, okay? Now, let's go to the 25th verse of Daniel. And it says, "Then King Darius wrote unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you." Okay? So, the fact of the existence of this king and these, I mean, see, he was the king of everything. He had empires and everything. So his father was rich, had empires, had nations. He covered, I mean, from one continent to the other. So the fact of this existence of this king and these circumstances is extremely well attested, and archaeologists have discovered the ruins of the very palace where these events happened. So in those days when King Xerxes sat on the throne of his kingdom, at this time approximately 483 BC, and BC is before Christ. So all this was happening. Wow. Okay. So Xerxes was planning for a doomed invasion on Greece, which would take place several years later. And at this time, the city of Athens was in its classical glory, and in Greece, they were celebrating the 79th Olympic Games. So this has been, the Olympic Games been going on this long? Wow, can you believe that? Can y'all believe that? Okay. In its day, the Persian Empire was the largest the world had ever seen, and it covered what we call today Turkey, Iraq, Iran, Pakistan, Jordan, Lebanon, and Israel, and also parts of the modern day Egypt, Sudan, Libya, and Arabia. And in those days, Ezra had returned to Jerusalem after it had been conquered by the Babylonians. So the temple had been rebuilt some 30 years before, and although more simply and without the glory of Solomon's temple. So in 40 years, under the successor of Xerxes, Nehemiah would return to Jerusalem to rebuild the walls of previously conquered city. So the 3rd through the 9th verse, let's read that. Ester 3rd through the 9th verse. So that in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast. So we're reading Esther the 3rd verse, the 1st chapter. So that in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast for all his officials and servants, the power of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of the province, being before him, when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the splendor of his excellent majesties for many days, 180 days in all. And when these days were completed, the king made a feast lasting 7 days for all the people who were present in Sushan, the citadel, from great to small, and in the court of the garden for the king's palace. And there were white and blue linen curtains fastened with cords of fine linen, and purple on silver rods, marble. I'm describing this stuff because these are the rich people. This rich. Marble pillars, and the couches were of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of alabaster, turquoise, and white, black, and marble. And they served drinks in golden vessels, each vessel being different from the other, with royal wine in abundance according to the generosity of the king. In accordance with the law, the drinking was not compulsory, for they didn't get like totally drunk. So the king had ordered all the officers of his household, so that they should do according to each man's pleasure. So we get to the queen. Queen Vash-ti also made a feast for the women in the royal palace, which belonged to the king Xerxes. So he made a feast for all the officials and servants. So, Queen Vash-ti had her own court, and she threw her own party and feast. But, they didn't describe all the stuff that was in her party. So he made a feast for all his officials and servants. The first feast was for all the government officials, where Xerxes should off the glory and splendor of the riches of the kingdom. The feast lasted for 180, so we talked about that. The king made a feast lasting the 7 days. We talked about that. And then the basic reason for these feasts was, of course, pride. Are y'all listening? I'm just describing. The king wanted to impress his subjects with a great display of his wealth, power, majesty, and his generosity. And this is typically the way that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who are great exercise authority over them. And let's look at Matthew 20:25. I'm reading the New King James Version, so if you all are reading it with me. So let's go to Matthew 20:25. Now, but Jesus called them to himself and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who are great exercise authority over them." Interesting, huh? So there is little doubt that Xerxes paid for this feast out of the public treasury. Oh, y'all got that? Okay. Y'all did get that right. Okay. So there were white and blue linen curtains. So we talked about how the ancient Hebrews, the white materials and the literally described as white stuff. And this may be evident that Esther was written with a man's eye for decorating detail, not a woman. So in accordance with the law, the drinking was not compulsory, meaning among some of the ancient, each guest was obliged to have a drink with a current round, or else leave the party. At this second feast, the kings command that each man could drink as he pleased. So at first, they only had certain rounds, but at the other feast, they could drink as they pleased. Now, Queen Vash-ti also made a feast for the women. Now, the third feast was for the women in the royal palace, and was conducted by the wife of King Xerxes, Queen Vash-ti. Now, Queen Vash-ti in the 10th and 11th verse. Let's go to the 10th and 11th verse of the first chapter. Let's look and see what happened. King Xerxes demanded that Vash-ti display her beauty before the guests at the feast. Let's see what happened. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, that means drunk, okay, he commanded Memucan, Vista, Harbana, Bictha, Abatha, Zethar, and Carcass, the 7 eunuchs who would serve in the presence of King Xerxes to bring Queen Vash-ti before the king, wearing her royal crown in order to show her beauty to the people and the officials, for she was beautiful to behold. When the heart of the king was merry with wine, the clear implication is that Xerxes was drunk. I said it before. Yeah. To bring Queen Vashti before the king wearing her royal crown, according to Jewish tradition, this request came from an argument among the men at the feast as to which country had the most beautiful woman. Xerxes decided to settle the issue by putting his wife, the queen, on public display. Would you go out there? I wouldn't. I'm sorry. My bad. I shouldn't have said that. But if they all are... Okay. For she was beautiful to behold. It's not specifically... I can never say specifically. There you go. Said, but the implication is that Vashti was expected to display herself in an immodest way. It wasn't to just say she's cute, with her crown, but that was not, it's something unkind. It's unkind. Queen Vashti refused to appear before the drunken guests of the feast. But Queen Vashti refused to come, and the king commanded man brought by his eunuchs. Therefore the king was furious, and his anger burned within him. But Queen Vashti refused to come. She said, though Vashti was by no means a follower of the true God, she had enough wisdom and modesty to know that this was something she should not do. I still say even she was chosen. There's just wisdom, and then there's just trying to keep her crown. But I believe she had wisdom and she was chosen, but it was time for her time and her season, and then it was time for someone else to take the place. But here we go. And though Vashti was no means a follower of God, like I said, a true God, she had enough wisdom and modesty to know that this was not something she should do. The Bible says that wives have a special responsibility to submit to their husbands. Wives, submit to your own husbands, as to the Lord. Ephesians 5:22. And yet it does not mean that a wife must obey her husband if he commands her to sin. Every command to submit on a human level is conditioned by the higher obligation to obey God before man. However, it's important for a Christian in such a situation to maintain a submissive and respectful attitude towards the one in authority. It is possible to disobey the command of another, but do so in a submissive manner. It's impossible to say if Queen Vash-ti had this attitude in this situation. It does not say if she disobeyed disrespectfully or not. It didn't say. Jewish tradition says that her refusal had nothing to do with modesty. These stories say that she was ready to appear before the banqueters, completely unclothed, except that God smote her with leprosy just as she received the request. And obviously, that's the tradition. Wow. Therefore, the king was furious and his anger burned. So Queen Vash-ti was therefore in a very dangerous situation. And it does not seem that she put herself in this situation, because it appears that she was not even at this banquet. So sadly, many women today put themselves in dangerous places, especially where alcohol is involved, showing a severe lack of wisdom. Nevertheless, it certainly gives no justification to the sin of men against an unwise woman in such a situation. And that's